has a ghost story that's been passed down through the generations. But what if those legends were true? My name is Miranda Young, and I'm the Ghost Biker. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to a very empty Ghost Biker garage. I am, as I've been talking about for the last couple weeks, I have been in the process of moving. And so as of yesterday, I've officially cleared out the house, minus just a few little small things, a deep cleaning and a few repairs, and that's about to go on the market. So one step closer to getting moved back to my hometown, to the farmhouse I've been remodeling, and closer to the historic Scott County Jail, where I currently co-own and work with my business partner, Dr. Christy Sumner. So if the sound is a little different and the look is a little different, that's what's going on. Hopefully very soon, maybe within the next week or two, we'll be in the new location and the show live from there. But very, very excited about tonight's show, tonight's guest, and all the great stuff that's been going on over the last little bit. Hopefully everyone can hear me okay. Last week we had Miss Wendy Koch from The Juicy Pear, and we talked about her book, A Gray Resort, as well as her background and her life growing up there on the resort and any of the different paranormal experiences that she's experienced. So if you didn't catch that, go back, check that out. That was a lot of great shows. Go and check those out. Wanted to talk a little bit about some interesting things that are going on here over the last, probably, I guess for the last 3 months. We've been talking about a great event that's going to be coming up next weekend. Finally here, it's amazing how time flies. But next weekend, March 24th through 26th, is the Haunting at the Mill Paracon, and the funds go to the Haygood Mill Historic Site. And we had Mr. Brandon Cooper on a couple weeks ago, who talked about this and talked about a lot of the great things that are going on. But I'm definitely honored to be one of the speakers for this event that's going to be going on next weekend. It's going to be a great time with vendors, with speakers, couple paranormal investigations that'll be going on there at the mill. I think they have a very limited number of tickets left. The VIP, I believe, may be sold out. I'm not 100% sure on that. If there is anyone in the audience that is involved with this event, if there are still tickets left, just let me know. I think that the daytime tickets, they are still selling at the event. So definitely check that out if you're in the Pickens, South Carolina area, because this is something, all the funds go to a great cause. So definitely want to go on and check that out. Excuse me, another really cool event. We've also been talking about this as well, and I wanted to go ahead and really kind of push this since this is coming up really, really quick, is EnigmaCons, and that's going to take place at St. Albans Sanatorium on April 22nd. And just found out that this is actually going to be the last EnigmaCons. So if you've been a part of this event, if you actually, let me zoom in on that so y'all can see it a little bit better. It's got all the different speakers listed here. If you've been a part of this event has been going on since 2017, and Bedford Paranormal, they're the ones that put this on, and they put on an amazing event. As most of y'all know, if you've been to these or if you've been involved, there is a ton of work that goes into putting these paracons together. And so St. Albans Sanatorium, all the funds from this goes to them, and they these events, they're extremely important to the historic preservation and restoration of these different locations. So at this event, there's going to be lectures, there's an escape room, they have an investigation the night of April 22nd. So I think there are a very number of limited tickets that are left to this. Typically these events do sell out really quickly, so definitely want to check that out. I'm also going to pull up on here, if you'll bear with me just a few minutes here. I want to actually pull up the site on here. EnigmaCons has a great site. It has the location where you can purchase the tickets. It also has the times and the highlights of the event, the times of the schedule and the speakers. I know that I'm going to be speaking at 2 p.m. on that Saturday, and I'm going to be at the Grand Staircase. I'll be speaking opposite of Alan Marston. He'll be in the connector hallway, but we've got a ton of great speakers involved with this. And again, truly honored. This is going to be my third year going. The first year in 2020, it was canceled due to COVID. But, last year was great. It was a sold out event. And it looks like we actually have Mr. Ronnie Anderson, who's one of the folks from Bedford Paranormal that puts on EnigmaCons. These guys, like I said, do a phenomenal job. So definitely go and check out the website, enigmacons.com, and get your tickets. Plan your schedule, because you're definitely going to want to come up to this event and check it out, especially with it being the last year. So amazing job, guys. I know you work so hard on this. A couple other little things going on here. Really, really excited. We made an announcement there on the historic Scott County Jail page. We actually ended up winning 4 awards from the Tennessee Association of Museums. As you guys know, the jail has been open for about a year and a half now, that we received awards of commendation. One of them was for our permanent exhibit, which is our 8-foot timeline that we have on there that talks about every sheriff and jailer from the start of when the jail was built, or actually when the county was established in 1849 up until we took over the jail in 2021. So we got the permanent exhibit award. We also got an award for our audio tour, which my business partner, Dr. Christy Sumner, put together. We've got, at this time, we have almost 20 stops, and we're adding more stops as we add more exhibits. So we got the award for that. Also, our website was recognized, and then we won in the special event category, which was for our Ghosts of the Past at Christmas tour that we have. So, really excited and honored for this, because the Tennessee Association of Museums, it actually represents all of the museums in Tennessee. So for 2 ladies who took a stab at being museum curators, we're really proud of that, because that's not what either of our backgrounds are in. And so it's really cool to be recognized, and also to see your hard work pay off. So I just wanted to make sure to mention that. I know that normally my business partner, Dr. Sumner, is in the audience here. We have a paranormal investigation tonight at the jail. She is working that, but she's going to, once she gets the team oriented and gets them on their way, she's going to be hopping into the audience there as well, because she knows tonight's guest personally. So we're going to kind of keep an eye out for her, but she did send me some questions just in case she's a little bit later getting on, that she wanted to make sure that I ask as well. Also, kind of a big day for making announcements, making mentions and that sort of thing. Also want to mention, we did announce a couple different events that we do have going on at the historic Scott County Jail. We're trucking through March here, so we do have a lot of guided ghost hunts, as well as flashlight tours on the schedule. escape rooms. We have something pretty much scheduled for every Thursday through Monday. But I wanted to mention this special event that we have going on Saturday, April 15th. It's our Blessing of the Bikes event. And so we're going to kick riding season off right. Come get your bike blessed by the Christian Motorcyclists Association of Jacksboro. And so they're going to be coming that morning. They're going to show up at 9 a.m. in the morning, and we're going to be blessing bikes from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. And they're the Servants of Jesus 1256 chapter. It's a free event, and it's going to take place in our parking lot right there in front of the jail. They'll have their tent there. You'll be able to drive your motorcycle right up, and those folks will meet with you. And like I said, they'll be able to kick that motorcycle season off right. Also, Dean's Pit Stop food truck is going to be there. And since in the morning, they're going to be having country breakfast items you'll be able to purchase there from their food truck. You'll also be able to come into our jailhouse museum, take a tour, and with the purchase of a ticket to the jail, you'll be able to get one of our free commemorative Blessing of the Bike stickers that I designed for this year's event. So definitely come and check that out. We've got a couple more motorcycle events that we're going to be announcing really soon. One of them is the scholarship that was named of my dad that will go to high school student majoring in the field of science. And so that's going to be announced. That's going to be May 15th. So exactly a month after the Blessing of the Bikes. We'll have more details about that coming up very soon. And also several other motorcycle rides that are going to start at the jail or start near the jail and go to our jail, as well as several other different locations throughout the surrounding area. So if you're a biker, we've got some very exciting things planned that's going to be coming up that we'll be announcing soon. You can find this and all that information at www.historicscottcojail.com. Go under the events section and check out the events. So definitely plan to do that and keep an eye out for some really cool things that are going on. Just want to say hello right quick before we get started to several people over here in the chat room. Thank you guys so much for tuning in. I just want to remind you, if you have any questions for tonight's please put, because that way, when we get to a break in the conversation, we'll be able to question. You guys are going to have a lot of for tonight's. So want to go ahead and introduce him, because I know he's a busy guy, and he took the time to come on tonight and talk to us. Impressive bio right here. Tonight's guest, author Dr. Harry Milman. He has Death Camp Soyuz, bestselling of the science of famous people, which I have my copy right here. He's a pharmacologist and toxicologist with years of experience. U.S. National Cancer Institute and the U.S. National Institutes of Health and the U.S. Public Health Service, and as president of Toxin Network. He has assisted in over 350 civil, criminal, and high-profile legal cases and has testified at trials and depositions. Dr. Milman has authored over 70 scientific articles and has edited 5 science books, including the highly acclaimed Handbook of Carcinogen Testing. Dr. Milman is often quoted in newspapers and magazines and has appeared as a toxicology expert on the History Channel and one of my personal favorites, the Oxygen Channel, television and radio news programs, true crime television shows, and numerous podcasts. So I'm very, very excited that he's coming on here tonight. So please help me welcome Mr. Dr. Harry Milman. Hey, doctor.
Hi, thank you very much for having me. I'm very excited to be here.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you for taking the time to come on with us tonight. So I know several folks who are here in the chat room actually follow you and follow your travels and stuff. So why don't you just go ahead and give us an introduction of who you are, what you do, and how you became an author?
Sure. So I know you probably most likely you have many listeners who are high school or college students who are taking forensics classes and kind of wondering what they're going to do with their future. And so I kind of like to go through, what happened with me. So, kind of give these students some idea how life takes you in mysterious ways. So in my case, if you asked me back in high school, what do you want to do when you grow up? I would have said electrical engineer. I was good in math. I did a lot of electrical projects on my own. I liked electricity. I thought I was going to be electrical engineer. It was also the space age at the time, was just starting. So that would have been a good fit for me. And as it turns out, I wound up in the biological sciences with a PhD in pharmacology. How that happened? Well, my undergraduate was in pharmacy at Columbia University. I did that for 5 years. During that time period, I was working in a drugstore part-time, and I knew from that experience that that wasn't a life for me, post-graduation. But I still didn't know what I wanted to do. So then I went for my master's in pharmaceutics. Now, when I'm doing my master's, I did a research project, and that gave me the idea that I liked research. So now I knew I wanted research, but I didn't know what kind of research. I just knew I wanted to be in a laboratory setting. So after 2 years of my master's, I got a job with the federal government on Indian Reservation, Minnesota, as a pharmacist for 2 years. But I used that I took that job as a stepping stone so I can get into the National Institutes of Health. So my intention was the National
Oh, okay.
Institutes of Health, and so for 2 years while working on the Indian reservation, I kept looking for a position at the NIH. Luckily for me, I got a job. I was offered a job at the Laboratory of Toxicology of the National Cancer Institute as a junior scientist, and that's how I wound up into the toxicology area. So that laboratory was a very busy laboratory. We did toxicology, pharmacology, biochemistry kind of research, working with animals, working with test tubes, working with radioactivity. I, that gave me the idea that I wanted um, something to do with animals, which is basically pharmacology, the study of pharmacology,
Hmm.
which is uh, the how drugs work in the body, if you will. And within 6 months of being in the laboratory of toxicology, my boss thought that I was PhD material, and he arranged for the NIH to send me for a PhD program at George Washington University. Uh, so the laboratory is in Bethesda, Maryland, a suburb of Washington, D.C. The coursework was downtown at George Washington University. My boss became my advisor. I did my thesis on the job. Took me 7 years or post masters, which basically means 14 years of college by the time I graduated. The only thing I had to do was work full time and go to school full time. Something I thought I could do, even though it was a little bit difficult. But the NIH paid for my schooling and I did my research on the job, so that it all worked out. So during that time period, as you can imagine, it was a difficult situation.
Hmm.
But now, you have to keep your eyes on the prize. And in my case, I finally got my PhD, and 10 years at the Cancer Institute, followed by 18 years at the Environmental Protection Agency in
Wow.
Washington, D.C. When I finished my 30-year governmental career, I was now a toxicology and cancer expert, published 5 scientific books, many scientific papers. And now the question is, what do I do now? And I didn't know what I wanted to do. But within 2 years, somebody recommended that I should testify in court. And I liked that experience. I set up a website, and then lawyers all over the country, as well as Australia and Canada, have been picking me up off my website. And now it's 350 cases later, about 24, 25 years of testifying. Um, I'm basically an expert witness in toxicology, pharmacology, pharmacy errors, and carcinogenesis, which is chemical causes of cancer. All right. So I've been doing that now for, like I said, nearly 25 years, testifying in court in these areas. And about 9 years ago, um, I came up with the idea of, I came up with a storyline that I thought, maybe maybe I should write this book. It 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 was called, eventually it was called, A Death at Camp David. So just to give you an idea, it's all about the White House that had a 4th of July party at Camp David. Camp David, as we all know, is where the presidents go for their weekend retreats in Maryland. And
Mhm.
so they had a 4th of July party. And the next morning, they find the body of a woman under a tree. So what happened? Who did it? And how does it affect the election of a woman running for president of the United States? And the main character who's going to figure everything out, I figure will be a forensic toxicologist, so I can take my whole background and experience, put it into the main character. It will be easy as pie. Well, the fact is, it wasn't that easy. It took 2.5 years to write it and get it published. I said, thank God it's over. It was too much work, too much time, too much effort. But my wife, bless her, said, there's a Barnes and Noble not too far away. Why don't you see if they'll do a book signing event? So I did, and I sold out. And now people ask me, what are you going to write next? And I wasn't planning on writing anything else. So because it was too much work. So now I had to come up with another story. So I came up with a space exploration thriller called Soyuz, The Final Flight, about sabotage of the International Space Station. Again, with the forensic toxicologist who figures out what's going on and what happened. And then after that, I happened to go to India a couple of times, and while in India on vacation, I learned a few things, which gave me an idea for a third mystery novel called "Murder at the Taj Mahal." I wrote it about 30%, and then they announced that Carrie Fisher, we all know Carrie Fisher from Star Wars, Princess Leia, that she had a medical emergency aboard the plane, and then she died. The plane landed in Los Angeles. She was flying back from London to Los Angeles, and she had a medical emergency aboard the plane. The plane landed in Los Angeles. 3 days later, she died in the hospital. The coroner concluded that she died from sleep apnea. Now, I didn't know that sleep apnea can kill. For those of you who don't know what sleep apnea is, that's when you kind of stop breathing for some period of time, basically some lengthy seconds period of time, but then you restart again, and there are very ways to treat that. And she had sleep apnea. The public didn't know about it, but she suffered from sleep apnea for some time. So now the coroner concluded that she died from sleep apnea. Now, I didn't know that sleep apnea can kill, and so that gave me the idea to look into her death, and we'll talk about that in a minute. But based on that experience, I decided to look at other deaths, and that's how my first forensics book came out. Forensics. There we go. Forensics, the science behind the deaths of famous people. So in this case, I reviewed the autopsies of 23 famous people in total, and I explained how the coroner concluded on the cause of death of these people. These are 23 people in the entertainment industry. For example, Marilyn Monroe, Elvis Presley, Michael Jackson, Whitney Houston, Robin Williams, Carrie Fisher, and many others. So looking at the Carrie Fisher's death, that gave me the idea to look at the other deaths, and that's how this book came about. And the Taj Mahal book was never completed. So it's still sitting there. People ask me, when are you going to finish it? And right now I'm in the nonfiction mode. And so is it okay if I continue?
Oh, please, yes.
So surprise, surprise! Everybody seemed to have loved the forensics book, and it got a lot of good reviews. It has almost 1,000 reviews on Amazon, and everybody wanted me to write another one, a sequel, as if it's so easy. So a couple of years later, I came up with the sequel. It was just published this past July 2022. It's called Forensics 2, The Science Behind the Deaths of Famous and Infamous People. And in that case, that reviews 36 other famous and infamous people, such as George Washington, Napoleon, Rasputin, Jeffrey Epstein, Kurt Cobain, Jerry Garcia, Mickey Mantle, Johnny Carson, George Harrison, Aretha Franklin, and many others. And now I'm in the process of writing Forensics 3, which is about half finished. And it's the subtitle for that would be, they got their 15 minutes of fame from the way they died. It's
Oh,
basically
wow.
people who were not famous, but they had their 15 minutes of fame because of their death. So I think that would be also I find it very interesting, because for me, I of course do a lot of, it's right up my alley in terms of what I do. So when I testify in court, I evaluate, autopsies, toxicology reports, medical records, police reports, scientific literature. I kind of evaluate all of that, then try to make some sort of a heads and tails scientific story, what could possibly have happened here. And that's basically what I do with these books, but I write them in such a way that the average individual who's either not academic, forensics inclined, if you will, or it doesn't want to read an academic book. I write it in such a way that it reads like a mystery novel, so it keeps you captivated and glued to the page, and everybody seems to like it. And so that's what I'm doing with my third book as well.
It's very nicely written, and I really enjoyed the way it was put together, because each of the chapters are fairly short, and I love how you go into the history and the detail, but then you also go into reading the report. But you're right; it is very easy to read and very interesting. I especially loved this first book, the fact that you covered musicians. I absolutely love music, and the stories behind some of these musicians, the way they very fascinating. I'd highly definitely recommend this book, and forward to reading the second one, and then for when the third one comes out.
Yeah, the what I found was, as I'm doing this research, um, I've found, and many of the readers mentioned that you get to know these celebrities as real people, not just as celebrities. You get to learn what they really like, as opposed to just celebrities. So, for example,
Mhm.
I say that you find out more about an individual from his autopsy than you find out from his biography. Um,
Yeah.
so some of these, let's take Michael Jackson as an example.
Mhm.
When you think of Michael Jackson, you think of you picture a very energetic individual, young looking, running and prancing around on the stage, singing very well, and and full of life and energy. Well, from the autopsy, you find out that he's a 50-year-old man, just suffering from the same kind of issues that every other most 50-year-old men suffer from. He has an enlarged prostate, which may, and then he's wearing a toupee, and he has arthritis, and all these kind of things that you didn't know about. Obviously it's not advertised, and you don't picture that in the Michael Jackson that you see on stage.
Yeah, it really humanizes the individuals.
Yeah, for sure. So, so I kind of like that. You got to know the people as individuals, as opposed to celebrities, and and again, these two books, just to be clear, they're not supposed. They're not. The aim is not to disprove what the coroner
Right.
concluded. The aim is to explain to the non-scientist how coroners arrive at their conclusions. And to the extent that there may be, I may have a different opinion, I would point that out. But generally, just because I may agree with the coroner, this doesn't mean I didn't add any value to the reader's education. It's basically, basically a provide information, even though it's in the public domain, but I put it all together and I
Mhm.
explain what everything means, including all the medical terms and how the pharmaceuticals work, for example, and then and try to explain how the coroner arrives at the conclusion, and and so and what some of the discrepancies could be, because in the end, after all is said and done, that the concept that your listeners should be uh, come away with at a minimum, learning from this podcast, is the concept of cause of death versus manner of death. And cause of death is that's where forensics comes in. Cause of death is a scientific explanation for how a person died. He died from a drug overdose. The drug overdose caused respiratory depression, for example. Um, there's rarely, if ever, uh, argument about the conclusion on the cause of death. You know,
Mhm.
Now the manner of death is an opinion, and different people
Okay.
have different opinions. So even among professionals, they can arrive at different opinions. So the manner of death is an opinion based on the forensic evidence, which is toxicology report and autopsy and other things, as well as the circumstances surrounding the death. Rarely on some medical evidence, from medical reports, they rarely have that, but uh, when they arrive at a conclusion. But in the end, they have to come up with one of five categories. The death was either natural, accident, homicide, suicide, or if none of those fit, then it would be undetermined. Okay,
Okay.
so for cause of death, they have to come up with a cause. By there I mean the medical examiner has to come up with a cause of death. He can't say and there's guidelines for what the cause of death could be, but and what it cannot be. But you cannot say, for example, that person died because his heart stopped. Okay,
Okay.
that's or because of some uh some disease or something like that. It's the cause of death is a specific um by a specific scientific explanation for what happened. So, like I said, respiratory depression, heart attack due to constriction of the coronary vessels, or something like that, or kidney malfunction. It has to be very specific like that. So let's take um, uh, what's the name? Um, uh, the um, Carrie Fisher. Sorry.
Yeah. No, you're fine.
Let's take Carrie Fisher, for example. Okay. So, in the case of Carrie Fisher, the reason that attracted me so much and made me look at the other deaths is the fact that Carrie Fisher, the coroner concluded that she died from sleep apnea. How did he arrive at that? Well, usually what you do is, uh, if it's a suspicious death, or a homicide, for example, then they automatically do an autopsy. Okay,
Mhm.
um, it kind of the process is taken away from the family, and the coroner makes the decision to do an autopsy. When it's not a suspicious death, the family can give permission or can refuse for an autopsy. In Carrie Fisher's death, you see, when he announced the coroner announced that she died from sleep apnea, I couldn't understand it because I thought most likely she died from a drug overdose because she was known to be a drug addict.
Mhm.
And so my
Mhm.
first suspicion was she died from a drug overdose. And the idea that she died from sleep apnea, not only didn't I know that sleep apnea can kill, but it seemed bizarre. So when I looked into her death, sure enough, there are a lot of question marks for me. One, they didn't do an autopsy. Well, why? Because the family, again, this was not a suspicious death. don't forget, she died in the hospital 3 days after her medical emergency. So it was in the hospital setting. That's not suspicious. Um, so the family didn't give permission for an autopsy to be done, and that means they couldn't cut up the body, and they couldn't take any blood work, they couldn't take any urine, they couldn't take any hair samples or anything. Okay, so now how is the coroner going to arrive at a cause of death? Well, what he did was he did a CAT scan, of the
Okay.
body. CAT scan, we all know, is kind of like an X-ray.
Mhm.
Did a CAT scan of the body, which that only gives you information about anatomical changes that could be seen in the CAT scan. Okay, for example, if the heart is enlarged or the liver is enlarged or something like that, they might, they probably will be able to see that in the CAT scan. But they didn't see anything. There was nothing abnormal about the body. Okay, so
Okay.
the CAT scan did not provide any information that will help the coroner conclude on the cause of death. Okay, so the next thing is that normally they would look at blood work or urine. Okay, but in this case they couldn't do it. They couldn't do it, because again the family did not give permission. So when Carrie Fisher wound up in the hospital, in the hospital they took blood and some urine for medical purposes. Okay, not for you know uh, uh, delineating the cause of death, but for treatment. In other words, they want to find out is there anything unusual about her blood work, that will affect the kind of treatment that she will be provided. So they took blood work in the hospital and urine, and they used it for their uses. And after she died, there was some sample left, not a whole lot, but some sample left. So the toxicologist in the coroner's office took those samples and did some testing on samples from the
Okay.
hospital, not taken at the autopsy. Okay. Now the problem was, like I said, the hospital took most of the sample. There wasn't much sample left, so they couldn't do all the testing that was needed in order to arrive at a conclusion. So the best that they found was they found some metabolites of heroin and cocaine and some pharmaceuticals. Okay, but they were not able to do the additional testing required to quantify. So they've identified but not quantify. And what you need in order to identify, in order to know whether these drugs had any deleterious effect, you would need to know how much was in the blood at the time. In her case, for example, at the time that she had a medical emergency, and there was no way to know that because you couldn't quantify. They didn't have enough sample to quantify. So the bottom line is that the CAT scan of the body provided no information, and the blood work was inconclusive because they couldn't do all the testing, and yet they still had to come up with a cause of death. And so by process of elimination, they couldn't say, for example, that it was a drug overdose because they couldn't quantify. So that was out. There was nothing in the autopsy on a CAT scan basis to indicate any malfunction of any organ. And so, and yet they still have to come up with a conclusion. So then they went to the medical records, and they saw that in the medical records that she had suffered from sleep apnea, and she had some sleep apnea episode on the plane. So the coroner concluded she died from sleep apnea because he couldn't say, for example, the cause of death is undetermined. That's not an option. He had to make a conclusion. So he said sleep apnea. But when it came to manner of death, because of all the discrepancies, he concluded undetermined. So,
Oh, okay.
okay, so the cause of death, sleep apnea, which may or may not be correct because they didn't have all the evidence, all the information, for example, to indicate whether it was a drug overdose. They couldn't do the testing. So sleep apnea, but the manner of death was undetermined. Why undetermined? Well, it wasn't natural, you know. It, I mean, she didn't have a heart attack or anything like that. That was we would have been considered natural. They couldn't say whether it was accident, and they couldn't say, and it wasn't homicide, and they couldn't say whether it was suicide because they didn't know whether she took an overdose on purpose. So unable to say whether it was accident or suicide, they say undetermined. So
Okay.
I thought that whole scenario of her death left a lot of questions still unanswered, but the coroner did the best he could with information that he had.
Yeah, and so that was actually going to be my next question, because and you it was going to be two-part, and you actually kind of answered that, because it was going to be what happens if the cause of death can't be determined. There is no determination of the cause of death. Who has the jurisdiction to keep investigating that, whether it be the police or the pathologist?
Yeah, so see, in my next book, for example, just to give you an idea that will kind of touch on your question, I have two cases where it was determined that it was suicide. The manner of death was suicide. Okay. Now, when you have that determination of, there was either natural accident, homicide, or suicide, when you have that determination, that kind of closes the case. It's concluded that it was suicide or concluded that it was homicide. No further investigation is required. That was the conclusion. If it's undetermined, it leaves the door open for further investigation. Okay. So in my next book, I have these two cases where it was concluded that it was suicide.
Mm-hmm.
The families of these two victims, as you can imagine, cannot accept the idea that their daughter committed suicide. And in both cases, as it turns out. So for 10 years, they're fighting the system to have it changed to either, in their thought, in their thinking, it was either a homicide or at the least undetermined.
Mm-hmm.
So for 10 years, both these families, they litigated trying to get the conclusion changed from suicide at least to undetermined, to keep the door open for further investigation. Mm-hmm. So on the one hand, what does that mean? To me, it means that when they do that, the case may be, when you actually look at the evidence, it looked pretty straightforward that it was suicide. But from the family's point of view, it kind of gives them hope, that maybe it wasn't suicide. Yeah. That's one thing, maybe it wasn't suicide. There's somebody out there who killed my daughter, let's say, and so that's one thing. But making it undetermined, it leaves the door open, gives them some hope that, that it wasn't suicide. And then the other thing is there's a practical offshoot of all this, and that is, in many cases, it's the insurance. Life insurance, for example, usually excludes, paying if it was suicide, but if it's undetermined, they'll pay. So there is that practical implication of changing it from one to the other. So I thought that that's kind of interesting.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So do you have what is probably one of your most fascinating cases that you've done that you can share?
Well, each case is fascinating in its own right, and I told you about Carrie Fisher, and we can kind of I can kind of review a couple of, let's say Marilyn Monroe, for example. First of all, again, I'm a scientist, right? So as a scientist, and we all are, for in one form or another. So, as a scientist, I work with facts. I don't work with speculation. You know,
Hmm.
uh,
Yeah.
opinions are based on facts. You know, if the facts change, the opinion may change, but but when you render an opinion, it's based on the existing facts. So let's take Marilyn Monroe for example. Um, there's been a whole lot of speculation about Marilyn Monroe, and that, for example, that again, just to kind of summarize what we know about Marilyn Monroe's death, is she was found in her bedroom. She was found dead in her bedroom on her bed. The door was locked from the in her bedroom. The door was locked from the inside. There's no way to get in or out. She was the only one in the room. There were three prescription bottles on her nightstand. Two of them were empty. One of them was half empty, and those drugs were found in her system. You know, and she obviously took an overdose of those medications. Um, and so the conclusion was that so then the only question was it suicide, or was it accidental? And uh and the conclusion was that, so the coroner, in part probably because it was a high profile case, before concluding that it was a suicide, he put together a group of well-known psychiatrists and psychologists to examine what we know, and they and to make a recommendation, and they recommended that it was suicide based on a number of factors, including the fact that she tried before, and I can give more detail if we need to, but she tried
Hmm.
before, the medication, and all the facts that I just mentioned, that she was alone in the room, and that the room was locked from the inside. And I excuse me, and I agree with that. It was suicide. Now there's some people, who speculate, and they say no. Um, uh, I think the stories that she was girlfriend of Bobby Kennedy. She was girlfriend of President Kennedy, and that they had something to do with it, or the FBI, or something like that. Had they killed her. Uh, that's speculation. There's no evidence. There's absolutely no evidence. But
Hmm.
it's speculation based on what we know about her interaction with the Kennedys. You know. Um, the,
Hmm.
they point out, for example, that in the autopsy, uh, her backside is pretty irritated, suggesting that the medications were given by enema. Okay, by
Okay.
somebody
Hmm.
else, by enema. Now again, there's no evidence for that. The irritation is probably due to the fact that well, there are a number of reasons. Some medications
Hmm.
do that automatically, and others, if you have
Hmm.
diarrhea or whatever it is, you can get irritated. But there's no
Hmm.
evidence that she was given an enema, and even if she was, on the one, if you want to go along that route, then you have to explain how did they do that when the door was locked from the inside, and there was nobody in the room. They don't touch on that. They just pick this one thing, and then they build a story around it. So
Hmm.
so my conclusion are consistent with the coroner, which is that she committed suicide. That previously she tried committing suicide with the same kind of medication, but she was rescued in time because she was making phone calls, and she was rescued in time. This time she wasn't rescued in time. She took her medications, and she couldn't get a hold of anybody. Nobody came, and she died. Or put in other words, it's just this time she succeeded. Previous times
Hmm.
she did not. And aside from the fact that she was despondent whenever she had various issues. So the so to me, taking all that aside, of course, she as a person, aside, we know again the public persona, but she also did a lot for the military, and she was very I think she was a feminist before feminism was even in vogue. She
Hmm.
started at one point. She started her own production company. She left. At that time they had these major studios who were taking care of their actors and actresses, and she wasn't getting what she was due. So she went and she opened up her own production company. Did so well that the studios begged her to come back. This is becoming a boss for a woman, becoming a boss before it was fashionable. And
Hmm.
so I kind of admired her. And aside from everything else, she was my first love. And of course I was like 10 years old. But I used to see all her movies. But um, she and Natalie Wood was another one. So that's the story with Marilyn Monroe. So but since we're talking about Natalie Wood, or since I
Hmm.
mentioned it, Natalie Wood is another one of those cases where people speculate. Uh, Natalie Wood uh, and her husband, Robert Wagner, and her co star went on a little weekend cruise thing uh, off the coast of California on a Thanksgiving weekend. And make a long story short, there were the three of them plus the captain of the boat. They went to a restaurant on shore, drinking a lot, eating and drinking, whatever. Came back to the boat, um, and apparently Natalie Wood was afraid of water. Afraid to get in the water. This is the Pacific Ocean, and she was found the next day. Her body was floating in the Pacific Ocean. How did she get there? Okay, they found her floating in the Pacific Ocean, and they found the dinghy, uh, a small boat that was attached to the main boat, floating nearby. Okay, so the question is, the assumption was that she tried to get into that she fell off the boat. She fell off the boat, accidentally fell off the boat, wound up in the water, and eventually drowned. The temperature was low, and she tried to get into the dinghy, but couldn't, and eventually she drowned. Now, the autopsy showed a lot of bruises and contusions, and and the assumption was that occurred when she tried to lift herself into the boat and couldn't, into the dinghy and couldn't. Um, she had some alcohol in her system. Um, Now, the some people. So the conclusion was that it was a accidental death. Okay, she fell off the boat and she drowned. But some people say there's there's evidence from another boat nearby, that they heard a big argument on Natalie Wood's boat between her and her husband that night, and therefore therefore he killed her, you know,
Hmm.
or maybe in the argument he pushed her, she fell in the water or something like that. Uh, Now, I don't know how many of your listeners have arguments with their spouses, but they never end. I would like to think they never end with a spouse dead. Okay, it's it's yes, you have arguments, but this doesn't mean that he pushed her in. And I can't imagine if she was pushed and she accidentally fell in the water, that he wouldn't have tried to get her out of the water.
Hmm.
Um, just let her be. It doesn't make sense to me. Um, but anyway, they say, well, there was an argument. There's evidence that they had an argument, so he has something to do with it. And make a long story short, the husband, Robert Wagner, who's still alive, I think, in his 90s, and her co-star were interviewed by the police several times. Eventually, the case was reopened. I think it was changed to um, from accident to undetermined. But
Hmm.
to this day, there's no evidence that anybody else was responsible for her death, and nobody else was caught. You know, so so it was changed undetermined, many years, like 20 some odd years, I believe. After she died, it was opened again. Um, the case was opened again and changed to undetermined. But undetermined does not mean it wasn't an accident. It just
Hmm.
means that, okay, we'll keep looking. For other, and they haven't found anything else. So it's again, it's one of those unfortunate deaths. Natalie Wood was such a lovely person, a great actress, uh, and everybody loved her. But it was just one of those things, and and the assumption is that they were drinking. She had some alcohol in the system, and she must have stumbled off the boat and fell in the water, and then tried to get into the dinghy and couldn't, and eventually drowned. You know. Uh,
Yeah. And that's, is it hard? Dr. Sumner just asked the question here, and we kind of touched on this just a little bit earlier. Is that hard to have it reopened to change?
yeah. So again, the coroner. So the coroner makes a conclusion on the cause of death and the manner of death. He makes that
Hmm.
he makes that conclusion pretty early. Um,
Hmm.
the autopsy is usually done like the next day after the body is found, uh,
Hmm.
usually at 10 o'clock in the morning, and by the end of the day, they certainly, um, well, if let me back up. By the end of the day, they have a tentative, but if there's blood work that has to be analyzed, it takes longer. Um, but eventually, they conclude on the cause of death, which is, like I said, rarely, if ever, at least I'm not aware of, where the cause of death has been disputed. You know, but then
Hmm.
the manner of death is, I mean, that's a stickler, and so the manner of death. The reason it's an opinion that can vary with the individual who's looking. So, which is based on the autopsy findings, toxicology findings, but then there's also the circumstances surrounding the death.
Hmm.
And so, but once he this and a lot of times, so to get information on the circumstances surrounding the death, that means that he has to speak to the, usually it's a police report, if that's we're talking about these kind of deaths, so there's a police report. So looking at the police report, ideally the coroner should also be speaking to, especially when there's questions, it should be speaking to the family, should be speaking to co-workers or other people that were involved in that death.
Hmm.
Sometimes they don't. Sometimes they don't. They rush to judgment, if you will, and then they make conclusions. So, for example, I have um, one of these cases I was telling you about, one of these suicides, for my third book. Uh, the coroner concluded it was a homicide. The coroner concluded it
Hmm.
was a homicide. He then spoke to the police who convinced him no, it wasn't, and then he changed it to suicide. So he wrote homicide on a death certificate, but then then he changed it to suicide after speaking to the police, but he didn't speak to anybody else besides the police, and that's part of the argument. And and
Ah.
and so, but once the coroner concludes what it is, I already mentioned earlier, it took these two families 10, 11 years to try to get it changed, and 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 you see, the thing is, like, if it was already determined that it was suicide, let's say,
Hmm.
um, it's everything pointed to suicide. So to change it to something else, you have to provide new evidence. That it was something else. So they get turned down. So that they go through litigation, but they get turned down on appeals all the time because there's no new information. So eventually, these families they hired experts who
Hmm.
came up with other conclusions, other possibilities, I should say,
Hmm.
and then finally, some judge agreed that they have now presented sufficient information to at least suggest that it could be something else, not necessarily, but it might be something else, enough to let's change it to undetermined and keep looking, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So, but it took 10, 11, 12 years, so it's
Wow.
not like it happens overnight.
That
Um,
and that makes sense. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure it's a pretty slow process just dealing with the court system and then dealing with people trying to go in and prove this evidence that or new evidence that's out there.
yeah, like I said, Natalie Wood, her death was changed to from accident to undetermined, uh, and it's still undetermined, but they haven't found any new evidence to indicate that somebody else did it. That it was a homicide. Uh, as much as some people would like to think that her husband Robert Wagner was involved in her death, there's no evidence to show that. But yet it's still open as undetermined. So um, let me see. In terms of other interesting cases, well, let's talk about Amy Winehouse. Does that sound like an
Yes.
interesting
Yes,
for you?
absolutely.
So Amy Winehouse, um, the problem with Amy Winehouse, so her thing was alcohol.
Hmm.
I mean, she was also into drugs, but alcohol. And so by the time she died, when she was found, when her body was found, she had 5 times the legal limit of alcohol in her system. 5 times. So we all know, from DUIs and that uh, in the United States, at least 0.08 is the legal limit for driving under the influence.
Hmm.
Um, and she had 5 times as much, in her system. So as you increase the amount of alcohol in your system, well, first of all, let me tell you why the numbers increase. So as you're drinking, especially if you're drinking too fast, so there's, on the one hand, you're absorbing the alcohol, and on the other hand, the body metabolizes it and excretes it. Okay,
Okay.
so on the average, the a normal person can excrete 1 glass of alcohol per hour. So you can be in a bar, let's say, and drink 5 glasses, but if you're drinking slowly, and you're sipping, you'll be fine over 5, 6, 7 hours. Do you know what I
Hmm.
mean? But if
Hmm.
you're drinking all 5 glasses at once, or within the hour, okay, your body can't metabolize that fast.
Hmm.
And by the body, I mean the liver. Um,
Yeah.
so the alcohol starts accumulating in your blood. The amount of alcohol in the blood starts increasing because the liver can't metabolize it, and the kidneys can't excrete it fast enough. And in her case, she had 5 times as much as the legal limit. What does that mean? Well, you can start feeling the effects of alcohol at I believe 0.02,
Okay.
but the effects are minor, right? But the more you drink, or the more alcohol you have in your system, and by that I mean in the blood, um, the more effects you're going to start having. So you start, you might be at the 0.05, you might be just giggling and happy and feeling some warmth,
Mhm.
but then as it increases, you can have cognitive effects. Can affect your depth perception, um, your your ability to respond quickly enough, and by point 4, basically you saturate your metabolic pathways, and it affects your brain, and you die from alcohol intoxication at point 4 and up. So and she had about point 4. you know so uh so that's how she died, from alcohol intoxication. And it's unfortunate, but she also had some medications, if I recall, in her system, but that the combination together had, was worse than just having alcohol alone. But but and speaking of combinations, that's the other point I want to make, is that some people, for example, are in pharmaceuticals. You think when you hear some, especially a celebrity dying from, from drug-related deaths, you think of drug overdoses. And most of the times that's what it is. It's a drug overdose, either cocaine or usually it's not cocaine alone, but it's heroin. And I could talk about that in a minute. But in many cases, it's not a drug overdose at all. It can you can die from what we know is known as polypharmacy, which means taking several medications at therapeutic levels, at the low therapeutic levels, but because these medications have similar effects, let's say sedation, then the combined effect of the 5 pharmaceuticals you're taking is enough to kill you, even though none of them were in the overdose range. And we have, so this is where people, and it's to me it's a little bit upsetting, because we're talking about these celebrities who are adults, they've been around, and they've taken drugs, and yet they can die from this polypharmacy, not as if they should have known better to take these 5 tranquilizers and sedatives, and put them together, and then to take them, and then the combined effects of the 5 sedatives is enough to kill them, without any one of them being at an overdose range. So, for example, Tom Petty was one. Tom Petty was in my second book. He died from polypharmacy. So he for example, he went on his band went on a tour, and while he was on the tour, he had a broken hip. He decided, he had to go on the tour because the commitment to his fans and all that. So he went, but when he came back, his hip was his hip fracture was further aggravated, and now very painful. So they gave him, they gave him some medication for his pain, but aside from the medication that they gave him, he also took medication that was not prescribed. And for example, fentanyl. Now, fentanyl is much more toxic than heroin. And not only that, he took at least 2 what we call designer fentanyl. These are fentanyls that are not have not gone through the FDA process for approval, and so more likely than not, he got them on the street somehow, and those are even more potent than fentanyl, and so now he had all these pharmaceuticals in his system, and he died from respiratory depression and the respiratory arrest due to a combination of 5 different pharmaceuticals, some that were prescribed and some that were not, and to me, when I read that, it's kind of heartbreaking, because they should know better, they should know better. Now, if I can give you an aside, people ask me, well, why all these celebrities, they have all this money and everything, why are they taking all these medications, why are they taking all these medications, all these, especially, cocaine and heroin and all that stuff. And now, in my earlier years, if we can just talk, if we can talk like friends here,
absolutely.
I'm going to divulge something. In my earlier years, I did stand-up comedy. I know it's hard to believe. I may not be that funny, but but I did stand-up comedy here in the Washington area. I did 3 clubs every week. We all know Bill Maher. Maher, right? I used to be on stage. I used to be on stage with Bill Maher. this is before Bill Maher was Bill Maher, if you know what I mean.
Uh-huh.
He did his 20-year. He paid his 20-year dues, and then he became an overnight success. I did my few years, and then I stayed with working for the federal government, which was a little more secure. But the point what I'm trying to make is, you're on the stage, and so I had a small taste of what it means for what a celebrity goes through. A celebrity, they get all that. They're on the stage, and they may have 2 or 3 shows a day. They get all the adulation from the audience, and the last show, they may finish, let's say, I don't know, 1 o'clock in the morning. They're pumped up. They're they can't fall asleep.
Mm-hmm.
I couldn't fall asleep. Just doing my 10 minutes,
Mm-hmm.
at 11:30. I would come home at 12:30, and I couldn't fall asleep. And the next morning, I still had to go to work. And so, so I got that little bit of a taste of what's involved. They go through this every day, and so they can't fall asleep. And then they still want to fall asleep, so they start with sedatives, and then before you know it, the sedatives stop working because they get accustomed to it, and they might either increase the dose or add another one, or they might change to something more potent, and before you know it, they're on several sedatives. That's probably the way it starts, because they can't fall asleep, and the next morning they still have to do rehearsals or whatever. And so they start small, and then with time it increases, either the dose or the number of different sedatives that they take or whatnot, all so that they fall asleep. The problem is, of course, when they finally fall asleep, it's not the REM sleep. And REM sleep is what, for those who are into biology, that's what kind of gives you the most you become you become more at ease. If you have REM sleep, you're more
I
as
guess it's
opposed,
more restful,
you're
maybe.
more restful, and so as opposed to, let's say, being knocked out with a like Michael Jackson. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
let's digress here a minute. Michael Jackson, his doctor, again under the same circumstances, would give him propofol. Propofol is an anesthetic that is given intravenously, so it knocks you out just like when you go to surgery. But when you're knocked out for surgery, that's not REM sleep. You're knocked out, but it doesn't mean that you're getting any rest. It's just, and so in his case, I'm digressing here now, but just another example. In Michael Jackson's case, that last day after rehearsal, his doctor, according to his testimony, said that he didn't want to give him propofol, and Michael kept asking for the propofol, but the doctor said he didn't want to give to him, so he gave him some sedatives first. The sedative didn't work. He gave him another dose a half an hour or so later. Before you know it, he gave him several doses of a couple of different medications. Still didn't work. Then he gave him the propofol, and Michael is sedated or knocked out. The problem is he had the propofol on the one hand, as an anesthetic, plus these sedatives in his system. The doctor, and this was all not done in a hospital, this was done in Michael's home. And now the doctor, Michael's on the table there and is all knocked out. The doctor goes next door, makes some phone calls. A half an hour later, he comes back only to find that he can't wake Michael up. And since all this was not done in a hospital situation, he didn't have all the equipment to try to reverse the process. And Michael Jackson died. He died from polypharmacy, and including these overdoses, due to the combination of these 3 or 4 different doses of sedatives plus the propofol. So
Wow.
the doctor wound up in prison for a couple of years, and of course lost his license. But um, so anyway, so I was just tying that in
Mhm.
with the idea that when you're performing, you're very hyper and you need help,
Mhm.
and if you don't, you can't fall asleep, and you can eventually, but you have to wait a couple of hours to calm down, and most of the time they don't do that, and it's easier to take a pill, and
Yeah. Yeah.
unfortunately, some of those pills eventually lose their ability to put you to sleep, or calm you down, because you become used to them, if you will, or
Mhm.
resistant to them, so you take more, or you take others, and before you know it, you're dependent on all those medications.
Wow. That's fascinating. We actually have a couple questions over here, and the first one here comes from Dr. Christy Sumner. She says, "When you conduct toxicology examines, do you have an idea of what tests you need to run, or do you run them all to determine what or if anything was in the body?"
Right. So, so the when a coroner, or a forensic toxicologist in the coroner's office examines the blood and urine, first of all, in order to see if a drug uh, impaired an individual, and by impaired I mean even if it was an overdose and killed you, you
Mhm.
have to measure it in the blood. Measuring it in the urine, so measuring in the blood tells, especially at autopsy. So at autopsy, it's the last time that, let's put in other words, when a person dies, and I'll put this next phrase in quotation marks, when a person dies, nothing changes after that.
Mhm.
That's not exactly true, but just to make it easy. So that means whatever was in the concentration of any drug that was in the blood just before he dies will be theoretically the
Mhm.
same after he's dead. Okay, the reason I'm saying theoretically, because there is some movement with of the drug from the blood into fat. So there's some movement, and different drugs move at different rates. But the point is, you want to know how much was in the blood of a given drug in order to be able to say, based on what we know from the scientific literature, in order to be able to say how impaired an individual was, as opposed to measuring it in the urine. Only tells you um, only tells you that person was exposed to this drug, but doesn't tell you how much they took or when.
Okay.
Because, as you can imagine, right, people urinate at different time periods, and
Mhm.
uh, drug get drugs get uh, excreted into the bladder, and then they sit there, you know, until you urinate. So it keeps changing. The amount in the bladder changes. So the, the amount in the urine only tells you you were exposed, but you don't know how much or when, and doesn't say
Okay.
anything about impairment. In the blood, it tells you about impairment. Now, how do you know what to test? Well, there's a standard 12 point uh, where they look at 12 different drugs of abuse, uh, and they do a standard screening test, what they call kind of quick and dirty, as they say, a
Mhm.
screening test of the blood for these 12 drugs of abuse. Um, and by that I mean morphine, some benzodiazepines. These are all basically sedatives and tranquilizers. Okay, so that only tell that first test, the screening test, only tells you that the presence. It's a plus or minus result. So it tells you yes, morphine was present in the blood, but it doesn't tell you how much.
Okay.
Once you identify morphine in the blood. Then he can do a second, what they call confirmatory test, which is very specific for a specific morphine, for example, oxycodone or morphine itself, or something else, and that's a much more expensive test, requires specialized equipment, and also takes longer. But that test not only identifies but also quantifies, and it's very specific. So the first thing you want to do is just kind of do it quick and dirty and see if you know what's in there,
Mm-hmm.
and then once you do, you can quantify. And when you quantify, that will tell you whether it was an overdose or not. You know,
Okay.
when somebody takes heroin, for example, um, heroin gets quickly metabolized to morphine. So you don't measure heroin, you measure morphine. So when they see morphine in the blood in high amounts, they usually recognize that it must have come from heroin. And a lot of times, again, a lot of these celebrities, again, surprisingly, they don't seem to understand, but they take what is known as a speedball,
Mm-hmm.
which is a
Mm-hmm.
combination of heroin and cocaine. And the reason they take that combination, and sometimes instead of cocaine, they might take amphetamines, for example. The reason they
Mm-hmm.
take that combination is because heroin is a downer and cocaine is an upper, and they think that one counterbalances the other.
Yeah.
So they get the benefits, but they counterbalance, and that's a misconception because they don't. How do you counterbalance? You're not going to counterbalance by taking the same amount of
Right.
each drug, because each drug has its own uh, dose response curve. So this one might be more potent than the other, and also
Mm-hmm.
they get excreted at different rates. So what happens is the cocaine dissipates faster, and the morphine from the heroin still stays around, and you wind up dying from a respiratory depression due to the heroin, because the cocaine wasn't around to counterbalance, because it got excreted much faster than the heroin, and apparently they don't recognize that, but a lot of them still take speedballs.
That's scary. I mean, but it makes perfect sense the way that you explain that, thinking on it on one level, not knowing the science behind it. You can kind of see where they might think that an upper and a downer would do that and counterbalance. But when you truly look at the science of it, that's and the excretion rates and such, that just makes perfect sense. And Marianne Malone says, I think that's what killed John Belushi. Do you talk about do you talk about him in your book?
Yes. So John Belushi is in my first book, and so he had, if I recall, uh, Marianne, is that her name? Was
Yes,
that her name?
yes.
Yeah, I believe she's right that he was taking a speedball, and that's precisely what happened. Um, That's precisely what happened. He was taking a combination of heroin and cocaine, and the cocaine, was excreted at a faster rate than the heroin, and then he died from the respiratory depression due to the heroin. Um, and but he's not the only one. He's one in this book, and I have other examples both in this book and the next book. But it's to me, it's very mind-boggling. That
Mhm,
they think that way. On the surface, it kind of makes sense.
mhm,
One counterbalances the other, but then
mhm,
that's without taking into account the differences in potency, the differences in excretion rate, the differences in the way these two drugs work.
mhm,
And let alone, and if you have any sort of and of course, if you have any underlying issues, let's say you had a heart condition,
mhm,
that cocaine can stimulate the heart, and and that can cause a heart attack too, or
mhm.
an arrhythmia. you know.
Hmm.
So so for example, Brian Jones, you
Yeah.
know, Brian Jones of the Rolling Stones, I believe is in my second book. You know, he died from drowning in his swimming pool, you know.
Hmm.
uh so on the one hand he drowned. You know, he was swimming in the swimming pool with a couple of friends. The couple of friends left the pool to answer the phone or whatever it is, and then they found his body floating at the bottom of the pool. So he drowned. What happened? Well, prior to drowning, you know, he had heart issues to start with, and prior to drowning, he had he took amphetamines. You know, so the amphetamines, I mean, you can tell. You know, when at autopsy, if a person had a heart attack. So let me just clarify or define the difference between a heart attack and arrhythmia.
Okay.
Because a heart attack is when you have narrowing of the coronary arteries, and so because it's narrow, you know, the lumen is narrowed, the blood um, you know, doesn't flow well to the heart, and the heart muscle doesn't get enough oxygen, and
Okay.
and could die. Um, And so, in a heart attack, for example, a heart attack is due to narrowing of the heart of the coronary vessels, or what they call atherosclerosis. And you can see at autopsy some dead heart tissue.
Okay.
And okay, that can be diagnosed at autopsy. And arrhythmia, which can also cause death, heart-related death. Arrhythmia is uh, an effect on the conduction or the electrical impulses in the heart. So, and that can only be identified with an EKG, and which is not done after death. You know,
Hmm.
you can't do an EKG on the heart after death. It has to be before death. So you're not going to know after death. You're not going. You can speculate based on the information that you have whether the person had an arrhythmia. You know, but there's no way to know by measurements because you can't do an EKG after death. That is to say, you cannot see, you know, you cannot see the wave of how the electrical impulse goes around across the heart after death. You can only see it before. So the bottom line is with Brian Jones, you know, he had some heart issues, and he also took amphetamine, and amphetamine stimulates the heart, so it's possible. Plus, he had alcohol, so it's possible that he died not only from drowning, but before he drowned, he had an arrhythmia. You know, which so he had a heart-related issues caused by an arrhythmia, and as a result, you know, he drowned. You know, so because he had the amphetamine in the system. Uh, so that's the difference between John Belushi, who
Hmm.
we know he took a speedball, um, and Brian Jones, who had amphetamines and drowned.
Did you review Brittany Murphy's case in any of your books?
Yeah, Brittany Murphy's in my first book, and by the way, I know everybody's very interested in all these, but may I suggest that they read the book, and
Yes.
they'll
Yes.
get much more detail. Okay, um,
Absolutely. Absolutely.
so you know, let me just see here.
And these that Dr. Milman is talking about, I just want to say he's just scratching the surface of the different celebrities and different folks that he's got in his books. So we do have the link, and I'm going to go ahead and actually share it right now. Again, we have it in the show notes, and we've been pulling it up where you can go and purchase his books. All of his books, all of his. Oops, let's see here. This It's pulling it up here. But you can go back, you can actually check in the show notes, and it's there on Amazon. All of his books, his fiction, nonfiction, all of those are on his page that we've got pulled up under his author page.
Yeah. So maybe Brittany Murphy will be the last person that I'll talk about.
Mhm.
So the bottom line with her is that she died from she died from pneumonia. But the thing is that she wasn't feeling well, and she was prescribed the medication, but she didn't take it. Uh, and so had she taken it, she may have been fine, but she didn't take the antibiotic on the one hand, and she was suffering from anemia and other issues on the other, and so in the end she died from the from an infection. um she had been self-medicating. Instead of taking the antibiotics, she'd been self-medicating with over-the-counter medications, which of course were not sufficient to combat the infection. So she died from the pneumonia. And again, there's much more detail in my chapter, in my first book. The first book, like I said, is The Death of Famous People. That was 23 famous people in the entertainment industry. My second book was supposed to be just about infamous people.
Mhm.
Now, I don't know if you can. Let me just show you.
I'm actually pulling that up right now.
So you can. What I want to show you is the thickness of the books, and so you can see this is the first one. This is the first one. It's thinner than this one. So this one is about 350 pages. Let's say this one's 750. And why is that? Well, because the first one, I had 23 famous people. This one, I had 23 famous people. And the comments that I got, some of the comments that I received after they bought the book was, they just couldn't put it down. It was so great that they just couldn't put it down. They finished it in one sitting, and I didn't want people to finish it in one sitting. I want to last.
That's right.
So so the first one had 23 famous people. I figured I'll increase it, and before you know it, I had 36 people. So I wanted to have 36 infamous people, but I can only think of about 18. One of my criteria was that I wanted to get to the extent possible, have their autopsies of these infamous people, and if not, at least have some information from published articles about their autopsies. So I could only get for about 18 of them, and so 18 was less than the 23 in the first book. So I wanted to increase the number, and so I added some famous people as well. And before you know it, I wound up with 36, and in part because people would recommend people for me to include in the book. So before you know it, I have 36. So my next book, so I think that's a little bit too big. And also on a practical side, the publisher wanted to charge, for the soft cover, he wanted to charge $55. I said, nobody's going to buy it for $55. And I had to fight with him to lower it to something around 28. I don't want to go through that kind of argument again with him. So I think my next book, I'm going to try to be somewhere in the 28 to 30 people range.
Okay.
So it'll be somewhere in the middle. But that's how I wound up adding famous people to the infamous people. And I think I mentioned earlier, but my next book, the next book was supposed to be the science behind not so famous people. But I decided to change the title. Still keep the concept, but change the title to they died. Excuse me. They got their 15 minutes of fame from the way they died. And the way I came to that title is because when I would have my book signings now with these two books, and I would tell people I'm writing my next book, I said, I would tell them, well, it's going to be the science behind not so famous people. That means people who are not famous, but they had their 15 minutes of fame from the way from the way they died, and
Mhm.
so that's how I got that phrase. And I figured, okay, I'll change the title completely, and it's going to be Forensics 3. They got their 15 minutes of fame from the way they died. People seem to like that, and so I think I'm going to keep that.
I like that. That's going to be a very interesting book because it's always interesting to me that when people, you spend your life however many years, and it could be a very long life, but you're known by this one little thing that happens after you've passed on. Do you have a date as to when you're anticipating that to come out?
So I'm about I'm halfway finished writing the book,
Okay.
and so I have another half. Plus, the publication process itself can take anywhere from 5 to 8 months.
Okay.
So I realistically, I would say somewhere between July and December of 24,
Okay.
most likely,
Okay.
somewhere in that time frame. I'm trying to get it published before that Christmas, so it could
Mhm.
be available for Christmas, uh, Christmas 24. So,
Wonderful.
somewhere there, hopefully earlier, but somewhere there.
Well, we'll definitely have to have you back on to talk about that when that gets ready to come out. I know you've got a great story behind this. So if anybody follows you, and I definitely suggest, guys, go on and again, it's in the show notes, follow author Harry A. Milman, and you'll be able to see where you can actually go and meet him, his different book signings. Want to know if you've got a story behind. I'm pulling up a picture from one of your book signings here, and I know anytime you see your smiling face in your tuxedo. You have a story you can share about that?
Yeah. So that picture was taken at one of my book signings. Like you said, I'm holding my two forensics books. Um, so I started writing. I think I mentioned earlier. I started writing about 9 years ago. I had my first book signing event about 7 years ago. It was my first event. I didn't know what to wear. Never did it before. So I wore a blue blazer, a tie, and khaki slacks. And I did sell out. So m- what I wore, didn't affect my sales. But but I started thinking, how can I make my book signing event a little bit more special than it was? Um, and I was thinking about rock and roll bands such as the Beatles, for example. When they started, it was just four guys with guitars playing, the Beatles songs. But by today, you have the band, you have pyrotechnics behind you, you have dancing girls, you have a whole bunch of people out, you have smoke and you name it. So it's much more of a spectacle than just four guys with the guitars. So I thought, well, how can I make my event also kind of special? And I thought, well, I have a tuxedo at home. I don't have any more weddings to go to. I never wear it. Uh, this will give me a good chance to, on the one hand, get more mileage out of my tuxedo and kind of make it my brand. And so I've been wearing my tuxedo. So the first time I told you I wore my blue blazer, the second time and thereafter, and by that I mean at least 400 to 500 book signing events.
Wow.
Uh, I've been wearing my tuxedo, and everybody knows. For, so first of all, it became my brand. Everybody recognized me right away in my tuxedo, and they also know that they may not remember my name, but they'll certainly remember the guy in the tuxedo. And so when they look for me, they if they don't see me, they at least can explain to the store manager they're looking for the guy in the tuxedo. So that's been working out pretty well, and I've been wearing my tuxedo ever since. And sorry, I'm not wearing it today. I wore it all day. I had a book signing event all day today. I figured this evening will be a little bit more casual.
I
I
like
promised.
it.
I promise to wear it next time.
Yes.
Okay.
Well, I
Yeah.
know Chris says that she met you at a book signing and he was in his tuxedo. You looked very dapper, and so she had to talk to you. And then after talking to you, she had to buy your book.
And again, for me, I enjoy it's these book signing events. It's not for everybody. It depends on your personality, I guess. But I enjoy meeting the customers, and for them to meet me. They get to know me as people say I'm very approachable. So I don't take I don't try to be above the crowd kind of thing. Uh, I always tell the customer. Um, I said, I just want to tell you about the book. You can buy it or not. It doesn't matter. We'll still be friends. So, and most of the time they do buy it, but sometimes they don't, and that's fine because one person doesn't buy it, another one will. Um, but by the end of our discussion, I know them, they know me, they follow me. I get their emails. I send out emails, let them know when I'm in town. We were talking about my schedule. I
Yes.
will. I have a lot of book signing events lined up. Aside from my local events next week, not this weekend, but the following week, that is to say March 25 and 26, I will be in Dallas, Texas, at two different Barnes and Nobles. Early April, April 1st, I'll be in Easton, Pennsylvania, Barnes and Noble, Easton, Pennsylvania. And on the 8th, I'll be in Lancaster. And just to let you know that in June, I'll be close to, but not at Ocala. I'll be going to June 9th. It's a Friday. I'll be in Alabama, Huntsville, Alabama, Barnes and Noble, Huntsville, Alabama. June 10th, I'll be at Barnes and Noble in Cumming, Georgia. And the 11th, which is a Sunday, I'll be at Barnes and Noble in Charlotte, Arboretum. All this information is on my website. I'm sorry, all this information is on my Facebook page. So please send me a friend request, Harry A. Milman, Milman with one L, as you can see. Send me a friend request. We'll be friends forever. And then you can follow everything I have posted on my Facebook page. If you buy the book, don't hesitate to send me a picture of you with the book. Again, to my just message me on my Facebook page, and I'll post it to highlight your support. And as you can see in this picture here, we have Karen on the right here. She took a picture and she sent me that photo. And on the left, you can see pictures that were taken of my various book signing events. This little young lady. Interestingly enough, I don't know if you can put the other one back on, but this one, she happened to be at the store. And by coincidence, she and I are Facebook friends. We didn't even know that. And she met me. She bought my book, and then she went on Facebook and she saw that we were friends. So she's not local. I think she's somewhere in the South. I don't remember now where. She happened to be coming to the Maryland area. So she bought my book, and as you can see, I post a lot of these pictures to highlight your support. So don't hesitate. Last but not least, my email address is Milman Author, MILMAN, Milman Author @gmail.com. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to email me, or like I said, you can email me or message me a photo, and I'll be happy to answer, and I'm very good at answering.
And we've got that also in the comments section here. So definitely take Harry up on that, because you're going to enjoy watching his travels, because he travels. He's always got stuff posted there where he's traveling and new people that he's meeting. And like I said, if he's got if you have any questions, please feel free to send those to Harry there. So one last question for you here before we wrap up here at the top of the hour, being, we're a show that talks about paranormal activity, and I'm always interested to listen to people's thoughts on it, especially someone who is a scientist. What are your do you believe in the paranormal, and what are your thoughts on it?
Well, I think I mentioned up front that as a scientist, um, I work with facts,
Hmm.
but I'm more than just a scientist. So some things are beyond. We have the questions, but we don't have the answers. You know,
Hmm.
um, so I'm always open um, learning about other possibilities and
Hmm.
investigating them, and as long as they're uh, s- things that are helpful, if you will,
Yep.
in
Yep.
one form or another. Even if we don't have all the answers, sometimes that's good enough. So
Hmm.
I'm open to paranormal. I'm not that familiar with the topic that much, but
Hmm.
because I'm primarily involved in the science part,
Yep.
but but I'm certainly open to investigations and learning about it.
Wonderful, wonderful. Well, thank you again, Harry. And like I said, we recommend people go look at the Facebook page to find out the schedule that his traveling schedule where he's going to be at Barnes and Noble. Is it particularly Barnes and Noble that you are at? Is that typically the ones where you do your meet and greets?
Yeah. So
Okay.
uh, I'm at Barnes and Noble. When I have a book signing events nationwide, they always tend to be at Barnes and Noble. Um, right now, I'm also doing events at Fort Meade Post Exchange, which is a military base right here in Maryland. but uh, but my weekends events tend to be at Barnes and Noble. So, like I indicated, I'm going to be in
Okay.
Pennsylvania, and then I'm going to be in the South, and so forth.
Okay. And I was just kind of scrolling through here to see if I could find that schedule online here, but definitely y'all go on there and check out his page. And if he's going to be in your area, go check him out. And if he's going to be close by, go travel on over there and meet Harry. Um, Thank you all so much for your questions and your comments. We've had a great discussion tonight. We also have the links to where you can purchase Harry's books. You're definitely going to want to do that because they're very interesting. They're very good reads because as we said before, they're written in a way that's easy to understand and very informative. So go on, check those out. We've got the links posted in the show notes as well as in the comments. And then also go on and check out some of the different events that I mentioned there at the beginning. Check out the events that we've got at the historic Scott County Jail coming up. We've got a lot of those. And then also is next weekend, March 24th through the 26th. Come meet myself as well as some other folks that are speaking about the paranormal, folks that are involved in the preservation and historic restoration of the mill, and then also EnigmaCons on April 22nd. So we do have other events scheduled throughout the year that we'll be talking more about here in the coming weeks, but we wanted to highlight those too because those are quickly approaching. So hopefully look forward to meeting everyone there. I will actually be there next Thursday night. I'll be doing the show probably live from the hotel as I head into town. Next week's guest is going to be Mr. Kevin Kane, and he's going to be talking about his collection of haunted dolls as well as his books that he has authored on some of those different dolls and some of his experience. So he will be on next week as we're traveling to the Haygood Mill. Also, just kind of a programming note that to mention a couple things. This coming Sunday night will be the Jailhouse Informant podcast live from the historic Scott County Jail with our guest, Donald Martin. Some of you folks may know him. He is a fellow paranormal investigator that runs the Atala County Jail. We highlighted that in season 5 of Ghost Biker Explorations. We were there doing an investigation. And so he's going to be talking about his jail, the preservation and restoration efforts there, as well as some of the paranormal and the hauntings. But we will also, this will be the last weekend that we will be open at the jail here in March. Next weekend for Haygood, next weekend when I'm at Haygood Mill, Dr. Sumner, she and her sister are going to be traveling to West Virginia to investigate the old College Hill Hospital. So we will be closed that weekend, but we'll be talking about it a little bit further once, and that will be the 24th through the 26th. The jail will be closed. So we will have more information on that as it gets a little bit closer. So just kind of note if you're planning to come and to be in the area. So again, until next week, we hope that everyone has a great week. Thank you for your questions, your comments, tuning in, and we will see you very soon. Thank you all so much.